My wife, Sophie, told me her best friend would be staying over for the weekend. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. We'd had guests before. But something about the way she said it, something in her tone made me pause. His name was Liam, someone I'd only heard about in passing. She used to talk about him a lot when we first started dating. Stories from college, the way he always had her back, how they just understood each other. I never thought much of it. Everyone has a best friend, but that was years ago. Now Sophie and I had settled into the quiet rhythm of marriage, a rhythm that had started to sound more like silence than music. We didn't fight. We didn't laugh much either. It was just routine. Sophie had been pouring everything into her career lately. Late nights, business trips, and phone calls that lasted longer than our dinners. I'd gotten used to being second place, the background noise to her ambitions. So when she said Liam was visiting, I told myself it didn't matter. He was her friend, nothing more. Liam arrived on a Friday evening, carrying a single overnight bag and a smile that felt both easy and cautious. He was polite, warm, the kind of person who could make a stranger feel comfortable within minutes. He thanked me for letting him stay and complimented the house like he truly meant it. Sophie was supposed to pick him up from the station, but of course, something came up. She rushed in 20 minutes after he arrived, already on a business call, barely making eye contact. Her apology was quick, distracted. Within an hour, she was pacing the hallway, suitcase in hand, mumbling about an emergency meeting in another city. "I'll only be gone for one night," she said, grabbing her coat. "Liam can stay here. You two will get along fine." Before I could respond, she was gone, just like that. It was me and her best friend, alone. Dinner was quiet at first. I made pasta, simple, safe. We sat across from each other, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Then Liam laughed, not forced, not polite, just a soft laugh at something small I'd said. And that was enough to break the awkwardness. We started talking, about work, about Sophie, about life in general. He told me he was between jobs, trying to figure things out. There was a calmness about him, a kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to fill every silence with words. As the night went on, the conversation got deeper. He told me about growing up feeling like he never quite fit in. I told him how Sophie and I had grown apart without ever really meaning to. It felt strange, easy, honest, and disarming all at once. He listened, really listened, the kind of listening that makes you feel seen instead of just heard. At one point, the rain started, soft, steady against the windows. We moved to the living room, leaving the dishes in the sink. The air smelled like coffee and wet leaves. We talked for hours. Not about Sophie anymore, and about everything else. Dreams, regrets, the things we wish we'd said to people long gone. There was a moment, small, quiet, and fragile, when I realized I was smiling. Really smiling. Something I hadn't done in a long time. It wasn't attraction. At least not yet. It was connection. When you spend years being half understood, even a small spark of recognition feels like warmth. That night I felt it, and I think he did too. At some point, I noticed how late it had gotten. Almost midnight. Liam yawned and stretched, laughing at himself for talking too much. "You should get some sleep," he said. His voice was soft, kind. I nodded, suddenly unsure why I felt reluctant to end the conversation. He headed to the guest room down the hall. I turned off the lights and stood in the quiet darkness for a moment. The house felt different, not emptier, but alive in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it was just nice to have company, that's all. But as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. His laughter, his eyes, the way he listened, I didn't understand it, and I didn't want to. Because deep down, I already knew. Something had shifted that night. Not in the air around me, but in the space inside me that had been quiet for too long. The next morning felt different. Not in a way I could explain, just quieter. The kind of quiet that stays after something important has been said, or maybe left unsaid. Liam was in the kitchen when I walked in, already making breakfast. He greeted me with the same warm smile, but I noticed the hesitation in his eyes. It wasn't awkwardness exactly, more like a shared understanding that neither of us could quite name. We ate in silence for a few minutes before he said, "You and Sophie seem like you've been together a long time." I nodded. "Almost 8 years." He smiled softly. "That's rare these days." I wanted to say it didn't feel rare. It felt routine, predictable, but I didn't. Instead, I just said, "Yeah, rare." The day passed slowly. Sophie called once in the afternoon to check in. Her voice was brisk, efficient, all business, no warmth. She didn't even ask how I was doing, just said she'd be back the next night and hung up before I could say goodbye. Liam noticed my expression afterward. He didn't ask, but I think he already knew. To distract ourselves, we spent the day doing little things, fixing the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, rearranging a bookshelf, talking about random memories. He had this way of making ordinary things feel lighter. At one point, while we were sorting through some old photo albums, he picked up a picture of Sophie and me from years ago. "You look happy here," he said. I looked at the photo, her smile bright, my arm around her shoulders. "Yeah," I said quietly. We were. That evening, the sky turned gray and heavy. Rain started to fall again, harder this time. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and a power flicker made the lights blink before going out completely. "Guess it's just us in the storm," Liam said, holding up his phone as a flashlight. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because it broke the tension. We lit a few candles and sat in the living room. The air felt still, charged somehow. The shadows danced against the walls, and in that dim light, everything felt more honest. He told me about growing up, how he'd always been close to Sophie because she accepted him without judgment. He hesitated before adding, "She's one of the first people who knew I was gay." I nodded, not surprised, just listening. There was no drama in his voice, just calm truth. He looked at me and said, "It's strange, though. Sometimes the people who understand us the most still can't give us what we need." Something about that line stayed with me. For a long time, we sat in silence. The storm outside grew louder, matching the storm inside my chest. He asked me what it was like being married. Really married, not the kind people post online. I told him it was complicated, that sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape until you barely recognize it. He nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Do you ever miss feeling understood?" he asked. The question hit harder than I expected. Because yes, I did, more than anything. We both laughed a little, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was one of those nervous, too honest moments where laughter is just a way to breathe. At some point, our hands brushed when we both reached for the same candle. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even intentional. But the silence that followed said more than words could. Neither of us moved. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. No thunder, no rain, no noise. Just two people, sitting too close, feeling too much. I looked at him, and he looked back at me. There was no desire in it. Not really. It was longing, maybe. Understanding. Recognition. He whispered, "You don't have to say anything." And I didn't. Because what could I say? That I felt something for someone who wasn't my wife. That for the first time in years, someone made me feel seen? Before either of us could speak again, my phone buzzed. Sophie's name lit up the screen. Liam looked away, standing up quickly. "You should answer that," he said quietly. I picked up the phone, my heart racing, and forced my voice to sound steady. She was checking in, same as always, reminding me of something about her flight schedule, then hanging up before I could say anything real. When I turned back, Liam was standing by the window watching the rain. The candlelight flickered across his face, and he said, "She's lucky, you know. You care deeply." I didn't know how to respond. All I managed was, "So do you." He smiled faintly, then blew out the candle between us. Darkness swallowed the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but my thoughts wouldn't quiet down. I kept replaying every look, every pause, every word. It wasn't physical. Nothing had happened. But in some strange way, it had. Something invisible had shifted. A line had been crossed, not by touch, but by truth. And as I lay awake, staring into the dark, I realized something I'd been afraid to admit. I wasn't sure if I still knew who I was within my own marriage. Liam hadn't changed that. He'd just shown me that I'd already been lost long before he arrived. The morning after felt heavier than the night before. The light slipped quietly through the curtains, and the sound of rain was gone. But the silence between us lingered, the kind that hums in your chest even when no one is speaking. Liam was already in the kitchen, making coffee. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't the same smile from last night. It was softer, sadder. "Morning," he said. I nodded, trying to sound casual, pretending nothing had changed. But something had. We both knew it. We hadn't done anything wrong, not in the way people usually mean when they say that. But we'd crossed into a space that words couldn't take back, a space where truth lived quietly, waiting to be noticed. I wanted to thank him for listening, for being there. But all I said was, "Coffee smells good." He laughed a little, and just like that, the air between us softened again. By noon, Sophie texted that she'd be home that evening. I didn't know how to feel. Relieved, maybe. Nervous, definitely. Liam and I spent the rest of the day keeping busy, cleaning up, fixing a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet, avoiding eye contact for too long. Every small sound, the clink of a mug, the creak of the floor, felt like part of a conversation neither of us was ready to have. When the sun began to set, the house glowed with a kind of tired peace. We sat on the porch steps, watching the light fade. No words. Just breathing. "I should probably go before she gets back," Liam said finally. His voice cracked a little. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to, that there was nothing to hide. But that wouldn't have been true. He looked at me one last time. No smile, no tears. Just understanding. Then he stood up, walked to his car, and paused at the door. "Ethan," he said quietly, "don't lose yourself trying to be who someone else needs." And then he left. When Sophie came home, she was exhausted, but cheerful in the way people are when they're pretending they're not. She hugged me, asked how things went, and started unpacking without waiting for an answer. For a moment it felt normal, the routine, the noise, the small talk, but underneath it something was gone. Something invisible but real. Over the next few days, I tried to fall back into the rhythm. Dinners, movies, her late nights at the office. But every time she smiled, I noticed the distance in it. Every time she talked, I caught myself wondering if she even saw me anymore, and maybe she wondered the same about me. A week later, she asked if everything was okay. I hesitated before answering. "It's fine," I said. But it wasn't. She sighed, sat across from me, and said quietly, "You've been somewhere else lately. Even when you're here." Her words hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. I wasn't with Liam, not really. I was with a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. The version that laughed freely, listened deeply, and wanted to be seen. "I just feel like we stopped talking," I said finally. "Not fighting, not arguing. Just not really seeing each other anymore." Sophie looked down, twisting her wedding ring slowly. "I know," she whispered. "I thought if I worked harder, it would make things better for us. But maybe I just left you behind." The room went quiet again. Not the heavy kind, the honest kind. We didn't fix everything that night. We didn't make promises or come up with grand plans. We just sat there, side by side, in the quiet truth of what we'd become. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't about blame. It was about acknowledgement. Later, as I lay in bed, Sophie asleep beside me, I thought about Liam's note, the one he'd left on the kitchen counter before leaving. It read, "Don't let silence turn into goodbye." I folded it and kept it in the drawer beside my bed. Not as a memory of temptation, but as a reminder of truth, because sometimes the people who walk into our lives unexpectedly don't stay. They simply hold up a mirror, showing us what we've forgotten to see. I never saw Liam again after that weekend. No calls, no messages, just silence. But I think he knew, and maybe that was enough. Sophie and I still have our quiet days, but now we talk more. Not always easily, not always perfectly, but honestly. And sometimes on rainy nights, when the sound of thunder rolls over the house, I remember that weekend. Not with regret, but with understanding. Because what happened wasn't about betrayal. It was about recognition, about two people finding a reflection of themselves in a moment they didn't expect. And in that reflection, I found something I'd lost. Not love, not desire, but myself.